talk a little bit about King Kashta. I want to talk about King Kashta. I want to kind of give King Kashta some love today. So I hope that you are doing well. God bless you. I want to kind of give him some love and talk a little bit about King Kashta and talk about this gentleman who I think was a significant person in history and a significant person in Kushite history. You know, we really have to get to the point. We really have to stop allowing people to tell us what our ancestors mean and to frame up the importance of Kemetic and Kushite and African and in general history that people like to just put in a certain way and put people in boxes. We have to not let people frame up for us our self-identity and our history. We have to start looking at it for ourselves. So I want to thank you, those of you who have joined me, looking at this particular offering here, Kashta, the Kushite King. We're going to talk about him a little bit. And I want to thank those of you who are supporting and enjoying this channel's membership. It's just $4.99 a month. I very much appreciate it. I want to say, folks ask, how can they help? What can you do? I ask you to take a look at my books on Amazon, Religion of the Black Land. I have several books on Amazon, but one of them is Religion of the Black Land. And you'll see the link in my description below. You can see my author page on Amazon. It takes a look at Kemetic and Kushite theology and their perspective from the context of their own documents. It looks at their own documents, the teachings of Ptah and the declarations of innocence, if you will, and the Shabaka stone and things of that nature. And we look at that from the standpoint of what did they say about what they believe. And it's time for us, I believe, to not let history be in the hands of somebody else. Don't worry about if your child goes to school and learns this or not. You take it into your own hands. Start to learn about what history means for you, what it means to you and your family, and be able to kind of put yourself in the own driver's seat. So that's what the Religion of the Black Man looks at, to give us some information. How can we apply some of these theological considerations and some of the things that they talked about really to our lives today? How can we apply it? So I asked you to take a look at that. It's on Amazon. It's by Danita Smith, and it's called Religion of the Black Land. God bless you. I thank you so much for taking a look at it and for supporting me. I do appreciate it. So we're going to talk a little bit about King Kashta. I'm going to talk about King Kashta today. He is someone who I believe is a significant person in Kushite history, and he's someone we should shed more light on. I want to shed more light on his life and things about him and specifics about him. And I'm going to be going through a resource, because you guys know I like to write, obviously, and I like to go through resources. So I'm going to be going through a resource that talks about his life, and we're going to examine some of the documents and some of the documental evidence, if you will, that talks about his life and how we know he existed and what he did and what he believed in. Because, a lot of times the titles that people take on for themselves, how they put themselves in history, how they like to be remembered, tells you a lot about their belief system. And we can look at Kashta and we look at his family. We look at various things about him. Even we look at things from the various deities and things that they looked at and what they talked about in ancient Kush. It'll give us an idea of what they believed in and how we can kind of jump into it. So we're going to jump into, God bless you, Team Z. I hope you're doing well. God bless you, Wildflower. I hope that you are doing well. Just want to say God bless to both of you. So hope that you guys are doing well. Thank you so much for joining. So wanted to say God bless. So thank you so much for joining. So hope that you're doing, and please add any comments below, because I know you have very good things to say, really insightful things to say that maybe our viewers and our listeners can see, and this will be archived, so you can take a look at that. So let's jump into talking about King Kashta, because he's a significant figure, I believe, and he obviously comes in from a perspective of the Kushite, the resurgence, if you will, new Kush, if you will, I like to call it, a resurgence of the Kushite empire and domination that took place in what people like to call the 25th dynasty. But it's way more to them, and it's way more to what they were doing in that 7th and 8th century BC that we should talk about, because they were able to establish a kingdom that lasted for well over 1,000 years. So not only did Kush and Yam and this whole area exist and thrive for many, many years and thousands of years before this, they were able to reignite and to resurge, if you will, and to reinstitute a kingdom that would last again for over 1,000 years. And that's a remarkable thing for anybody to be able to do. And actually Kashta, the word Kashta and the name Kashta has been translated to literally mean the Kushite. So when you say Kushta or Kashta, it's literally meaning he of, a person of Kush. So it really kind of has been translated. It really kind of hones in on what he believed about himself and what he took in terms of his identity and how he moved forward. So we'll talk about them. And this particular picture here is not of Kashta, but is of probably one of his descendants. It could be Shabaka, it could be Taharka. It is one of people who are likely a part of his family line. So let's take a look at his family line. Let's look at some documents in terms of how we know about Kashta and what that means. And I'll kind of pull up this, and you may have seen this before, but I'll put this up with respect to this historic king so you can kind of see it and give you like a little bit of make it a little bit bigger so you can kind of take a little bit of a look at it. But it gives you kind of an idea of Kashta and where he's coming from. So he is alive during the 8th century BC. And he is alive, obviously, in the what is today the modern day Sudan. He is living around the area of Napata. And his family, not just him, but people who came before him, not just him, but his older brother Lara, and people who came in their line of dynastic kings, if you will. And in Kushite theology and in Kushite practice, it wasn't just a king. It wasn't just a king you were looking at kings and queens. So a lot of times, not only in Kush, but in Kemet as well, the legitimacy for a throne, the legitimacy for who would pass on the kingship, if you will, and the rulership from one person to the other, it went through the woman. The woman had a very significant role. It wasn't like a kind of ceremonial role. It wasn't. If you look at ancient Kush, and we're going to talk even more about this as we dig into it, there probably that I can see, and I would be willing if you tell me more if you know, there are probably no women of antiquity who had and enjoyed the same level of rulership and queenship and generalship, if you will, and just authority that the women of Kush did. I mean, they stand out. I mean, there are obviously many, many famous and significant women all around the world throughout history. The women of Kush stand out. And you think about the past several thousand years, right? The women of Kush stand out. They stand out in history as being significant in rulership, in leading military, in their significance and their political structure and what they contributed to the ruling of the land. They were not just, wallflowers, if you will, or ceremonial pieces. So as you look at Kashta and we think about his land, we have to know that there are counterparts, and his mom and his family and who will become his wife and those of his children will become significant. It's not just him. It's not just a story about him and of himself, but he lived during the 8th century BC. So the time that he reigned and the time that he ruled was from about 760 BC to 747 BC. And during his time, he was significant because at this time, after this time, you start to see the Kushite dynasty continue to grow in power. So during his rule and during his time, they had already begun to coalesce and to make things kind of move forward. As we kind of take a look at this map, they had already begun to coalesce and to bring together the many different people that were there hugging around the Nile Valley and what is Upper Nubia. So that part that is modern day Sudan. So think about where Meroe is down there around the 5th and 6th cataract, all the way up to the 4th cataract, where Napata is, and the burial grounds of El Kuru and Nuri, which are right around Napata, right in that area. And then you see Jebel Barka, the pure mountain, the holy mountain. And you see the ancient city of Kerma, the ancient city that was in that area of Kerma, all the way up to the 2nd cataract. That was all kind of coalesced and brought under one structure. So you're talking about a massive area, and you're talking about the idea of bringing a lot of different people who would have had, fighting and challenges to come together. Sometimes we ask ourselves, how can we come together today? Is that even possible? Look and know that your ancestors have done it in the past in very difficult situations. And this whole idea of this dynasty that Kashta and Alar are a part of, and their predecessors, they were able to do that. They were able to do that during a time in Kush's history where the New Kingdom and Kemet had kind of left and had been there for several hundred years and had left. And remember, they were already dealing with thousands of years of history. So they had ancestors that were there for thousands of years, long before Kemet came in and controlled this part of Nubia, this part of their area. But they're in a kind of a bit of a vacuum. How do you stand in when you have a dynamic rulership that's been there for several hundred years and things have kind of fallen apart and fallen down? Well, these men and women stood in. They stood up and they stood in and they brought their people together. And they were able to coalesce the southern part of Nubia, if you will, that Upper Nubia, and this whole area that is modern day Sudan. And you find that Alar was able to do that, Kashta's older brother. And then Kashta comes in, and it's amazing. We do not see the documented evidence does not show any type of violence. They don't show this violent takeover of Kashta when he goes into Upper Kemet. He moves into Lower Nubia. So this whole area where the 2nd cataract, if you take a look at that, where it says Kustu and Buhan and Lower Nubia, he takes over that whole area. This is becoming under Kashta's rule. He begins to come in and he takes over that whole area. And not only does he take over that area, he moves into Upper Kemet, and that whole area where you have Waset and Nekton and Abydos, and Abju and Yebu, Elephantine, and eventually Hermopolis, which is Kamun. He has all that area is under Upper Kemet's rule, and you have these very powerful priests who are in the temple of Epetisut at Karnak, the temple of Karnak, and they are kind of in control, and there's a vacuum, a fight, if you will, in terms of who's under control between Upper and Lower Kemet. Well, Kashta moves in and he takes over this area and becomes king. He becomes king of Upper and Lower Kemet. He becomes king, if you will, of this area, mostly of Upper Kemet, without a fight, without this bloodshed. There's no bloodshed. It's amazing because it appears that the priest of Amenirdis at the temple of Karnak were welcoming the Kushite people, understood them in their connection with Amen. And as you move forward, it's a remarkable thing because as he moves forward, he's not getting pushback from the people of the southern part of Kemet when he comes in. He comes in as king. Now, there's no doubt about it. He comes in as king and he's ruling, and it will become his son later on, Piankhy, who would come and take over the northern part of Kemet. So he comes in having taken over not only all of Kush and the whole part of modern Sudan, but also Lower Nubia, which is at the southern Kemet, some of Egypt, and then goes in and taken what is proper Upper Kemet, which was in ancient times the southern part of ancient Kemet. He takes over that whole area and he becomes king, and he's respected and he is a ruler. And it isn't until his family afterward that they begin to move even farther. But he's a ruler. And that to me, when you think about life and you think about what you're able to contribute, that's significant. A lot of times when we talk about ancient Kush, a lot of times people just leave out Kashta, which I think is ridiculous. People just leave him out, and they'll mention Piankhy or Pi, however you like to pronounce his name. They'll mention him and they'll talk about Shabaka, and they kind of just cut you off at Taharka. They don't mention Tanwetamani, and they make it seem like the Assyrians came and almost in one or two blows kicked the Kashta out, and that was it. That's pretty much all they mention. They don't even mention his name, and he is a large part of the foundation that's established in Kemet when Kush begins to take over Kemet and basically make Kemet a colony, make Kemet, a tributary to them, somebody who pays tribute to them. When they do that, we don't mention them. And that kind of goes back. He is an example of us not allowing other people to define history for us. You will hear documentaries, you will see things written, and they won't even mention his name, or they mention very small parts. And it's almost like they're saying, if you don't have all of Kemet, in our opinion, you're not important. That, if you don't have, I don't care if you have all this area here, you're not important. And that's allowing somebody to define for you what your accomplishments are. And I think we have to reject that. I think we have to just kick that to the side when people want to come in, and particularly people who might have a Western agenda or Western, historians want to come in and just say, that's not significant. Just remove that, because that's almost like saying to yourself that your ancestors and the people who represent your heritage and represent you and who you identify with, that what they ruled didn't matter. That's really almost, when you accept people not talking about ancient Kemetic, ancient Kushite, and African leaders, you're accepting an idea that what they didn't matter. It didn't matter unless it touched Rome. It didn't matter unless it touched Greek. Literally Greece. That's literally what we're saying. And you can't do that because, very few people allow you to kind of look them in the eye and basically insult them. and you have to take control of your idea of history. Take control of your concept of history and understand that what these people did was remarkable. Being able to develop a kingdom that lasted for well over 1,100 years, well over 1,000 years, to have a continuity of family, to be able to control trade in gold, to be able to have buildings, to be able to have their families stick together and live lives of peace and interact with the people around them and protect their homes, and to not be taken over. They were certainly attacked. They certainly had wars, but they were not defeated. Imagine being able to defend your home for 1,000 years. And defend and it be significant, and what their beliefs were and how they saw themselves. It's important that we look at it and not just look at it within the context of ancient Kemet, right? That's how people want to tell us to look at it, but that's not it. So it becomes really important. I hope that this channel and some of the things that I'm sharing with you will help us understand that we can't let people define us. When I think about self-determination and that concept of Kujichagulia that we talk about in Kwanzaa, that to me is one of the most important principles that's put forth with respect to Kwanzaa, because self-determination is significant. Self-determination is connected with your idea of freedom. It's connected with your idea of who you are and how you can make your whole life mean something when you are determining for yourself. There is a famous line that I'd like to share. There's a woman whose name is Mom Bet. She was enslaved in Massachusetts, and she won her freedom in a very famous way, in a very famous court. And she said, if at any time while I was enslaved, if 1 minute of freedom had been offered to me, and I was told at the end of those 60 seconds I would die, I would have gladly taken it just to spend 1 minute on God's green earth, a free woman. And when I think about that, I say, wow, think about that. That sums it up for me. It sums up our answers for me. Just to spend 1 minute on God's green earth, a free woman, the ability to determine for yourself what things mean, what your name will be, how you will look at your history is a significant thing. Our ancestors are telling us that from long ago, and even for more recent times, that we have to determine for ourselves. So as we look at King Kashta within the spirit of that, and within the spirit of Mambep, we'll look at, what he did and his family and what he kind of contributes. So as I mentioned, he's in the 8th century BC, and we are talking about, somebody who is taking control over Upper Kemet, has already control over Lower Nubia and all control over Upper Nubia. He is in control of that. And some of the documents, if you'd like to look them up or just be aware of them, to help us know about him and what he did. There's one particular document that I think is a pretty famous document if you look at it. It's one of this stela at Elephantine at Yibu. And that was the name of the Kemetic name for this area of Yibu. It's called Elephantine in a Greek sense. It's called Elephant by the Greeks, if you will. But it is at the very southernmost part of the border, the natural border between ancient Kemet and Nubia, right? That natural border there. And so when you look at it, you start to see right there where you see the first cataract. You start to see at this time under Kashta, him begin to make official documents and official stone stelas, stone documents of his presence and of his lordship and of what he was ruling. And for him to have this, right at the first cataract, and for him to be able to say and to make the pronouncement that we should talk about in just a minute, indicates his success in being able to take over this whole area. It indicates his success of being in control, because he is making this document and this proclamation at Yibu, at the very border, if you will, of ancient Kemet and Nubia. And it is a document that goes to Khnum Ra, who is, Lord of the Cataracts. So when you think about Lord of the Cataracts and you think about, that whole area, a lot of times the Kemetic people looked at, obviously, the cataract and the first cataract in particular as being an important source of the Nile that was coming into and feeding their land with a lot of, black silt and a lot of important soil and resources and nutrients to make them live. And so there was an acknowledgement of Khnum and of Ra being a giver of life, and that was a significant temple there at the first cataract right there in ancient Kemet, on the border between Kemet and Nubia. And there is a stela there that Kashta put up as in documenting, and it talks about himself. And I want to look at his name. I want to kind of examine his name real quick. And it talks about him as being, Nesut-Bidi, the he of the sedge and the bee. So that symbolizing the symbolism of the sedge, if you've seen it, kind of like the reed, if you will, and the bee, if you will, being the symbol of Upper and Lower Kemet. The symbols of the sedge and the bee. It is basically like saying, people will interpret that as being king of Upper and Lower Kemet. It may also be saying he of the sedge and the bee, he who is in control of, he who is in charge of both Upper and Lower Kemet, the sedge and the bee, the symbols for them. You see that in all the cartouches. You see that in the Kemetic kings as they pronounce themselves in this exact same way. So he is proclaiming himself in this exact same way as ancient Kemetic kings did and rulers did. He of the sedge and the bee, the king of Upper and Lower Kemet, the possessor of truth. Ra is truth. Truth is Ra and equity is Ra. He's calling himself as a possessor of Ma'at, the possessor of truth and of peace. So you think about, we've talked a lot about Ma'at and the concept of a Ma'at on this channel, and the whole idea of Ma'at representing righteousness and peace, and not just order. Like people say Ma'at represents order, but it's deeper than the order. It's not just order. Because at the end of the day, if you are accepting God's truth in your life, that will bring about order, right? So when we talk about cosmic order of Ma'at, it's really talking about your divine will and being able to connect with God and to live a life that's according to God's will. And they literally had the declarations of innocence, the 42 declarations of innocence, take place in the Hall of Ma'at, in the Hall of Justice, if you will, the Hall of Justice, taking place in the Hall of Ma'at. So it's giving you an idea that that person is saying that I declare that I did these things on earth. I did not do bad things. I did not hurt anybody. I did not, do these things on earth. And that entitles me to being my heart weighed against a feather, right? The feather of Ma'at, and to show that I am a truth. I'm true of mouth. I speak the truth. I live the truth, and my heart is in connection with the truth. So when Kashta says that he is the possessor of Ma'at, when he takes on the name where he is, possessor of Ma'at, and Ma'at is truth, and Ra is truth, and Ra is equity, he is saying, I'm possessing the heart. I'm doing more than just bringing order to the land. I'm bringing order in a way that's divine. I'm bringing order in a way that's righteous. I'm bringing order in a way that stands on the principles of Ma'at, that stands on these declarations of innocence, that stand on the beliefs and the ideals that we believe the God of our men stands for. This is what I represent. This is what I embody. This is what Kashta is saying. So as he is saying that he represents that and he embodies that, God bless you. Thank you so much, Wafi. They're Bangor Customs, all right? Thank you so much. I appreciate it. God bless you, Cartwright. I thank you so much. That the female sisters or niece, there you go. So thank you for that comment. So he is saying that I am embodying these and I'm bringing this to the land. I'm bringing this to Upper and Lower Command. I'm bringing this to this area, and he is welcome. So he's claiming himself and proclaiming himself as being the person who possesses truth and ma'at, and who's bringing that peace and that truth, not just order, cosmic order, but peace and truth through the order comes through your connection with the divine, right? So I'm bringing that to Kemet. And then, he's saying he's the son of Ra, that he is the son of Ra, right? Lord of the two lands, the Kushite. When you think about his name, Kashta, the ancient Kemetic kings and Kushite kings, their birth name, their given name, if you will, or how they would kind of look at themselves, what they would call themselves. One of the names they took in their title was son of Ra. So literally talking about being son of the body of Ra. And even if you were Hatshepsut, you were also taking on being a daughter or expression of Ra. So they're saying that they are a literal expression of God's life force, of the life force that brings life to all. So that order and divinity, Ma'at, brings life and brings peace, and God itself manifests itself in forces and in truth and in peace, and that I am the embodiment of it. And as we take a look at just his name in Kashta, it has been literally written as Kush, where if you see like K with kind of a backwards looking 3 or a little bit of a 3 through it, and then like a dash and an S and a T. A lot of times you'll see that K and S will represent Kush, right? You'll see it represented in different ways, but the idea of Kush or Kes is also talked about a lot in Kemetic writings. And even when the Kushite people wrote about themselves, when they wrote this word, they were talking about Kush. And as he writes his name in his title, he's talking about and calling himself basically the son of Ra, a Kushite. And that's how it's been interpreted. And some people may say it may have to do with your Ka, but most of the interpretations literally interpret it as being a Kushite. And this what you see right here on the very far hand, on the right hand side of the screen. That's a cartouche. That's his name in a cartouche. You're seeing his name in a cartouche there, that Kashta, if you will. And right beside is that of his daughter, Amenirdis the first, who we'll talk about in just a second. She was the God's wife of Amen. She was a high priestess, almost one of the highest ranking people in the temple of Karnak during his reign. And it had a lot to do with legitimizing his reign and how they worked with men and women, how male and female was significant in Kushite rule. It was significant in New Kingdom. It was significant in Kemet, but in reality, and you guys can tell me what you think, because I know you know a lot more about it, maybe a lot more about it than I do. You know a lot more about it. That from a Kushite standpoint, the rule of the woman and the validity of the woman in helping them, the king become the appropriate ruler and seen as the appropriate ruler was significant. And they put women right hand in hand with men. You can see so many examples of that. Piankhy's victory stele here in the God's wife of men. So we'll talk about that in just a minute. So this is Kashta on the far right beside his daughter, Amenirdis the first. And this is a vessel, if you will, that was used as a libation with liquid in it and used in ceremonies from an offering standpoint. So you can see his name there, and he's calling himself the son of Ra, the son of God's body, basically the Kushite, he who is of Kush, he who comes from Kush. So a person who embodies the divinity of God, who embodies Ma'at, who is a son of Ra, and who is the person who is of Kush. So he's literally calling himself, and it is a kind of a play on words. His name is a lot of Kushite and African and Kemetic writings. You would say it would be a word that maybe sounds like one thing and is also referring to another, because you can have a double play on words. So that whole idea of Ma'at and truth is kind of a double play, and this whole idea of the son of Ra, he's playing on words, but he's definitely saying that I'm a divine expression of truth, a divine expression of Ma'at, and that I am a bodily son of Ra, and that I am a Kushite. I am from Kush. I'm here from Kush, and he represents Kush. And while there may be some debate about exactly what his name means, it is clear that he is a king of Kush, that he is a king from this area, and he's taken over Upper Kemet. And as I mentioned, he's taken over Upper Kemet without a fight. There's no violence here. So God bless you, God bless you. Yeah, one and the same. They're one and the same. Thank you so much. Very, very much appreciated. He is taking over Upper Kemet without violence. Where do you remember this? As I think about it, and I think about the whole story of the Asarian Tale, where Sar goes and he is, he has brought peace to his own land. He's brought, peace and prosperity. And then he goes to bring peace and prosperity and the laws of Ma'at, if you will, to other places around the world. And he does it through music and through words of power, not through violence and not through force. He's able to convince people of the truth of what he's saying. And that's how God, that's even more powerful. That's how God gets you when you are willing to do it, when you are convinced by the rightness of what is being said to commit your life in something versus being forced to do something. And that's how Kashta comes into Upper Kemet. He doesn't come in forcing. He's coming as the rightful ruler. He's coming as somebody who's seen as a rightful ruler, and he's not coming in as forced. And it kind of reminds me of the whole tale of the Asarian tale and how he comes in, which I think is remarkable. So here's this man, in history, coming in, taking over a vast amount of area and doing it in a way that's peaceful, doing it in a way where he's coming into one of the most important, if not the most important temple in all of Kemet, maybe beside Memphis, but the most important temple in all of Kemet, maybe one of the most significant places of worship in all the world. He's coming in there at this time. He's coming in there and he's taking over and he's being invited and he's doing it without violence, right? So you see him, the son of Ra, the Kushite, Kashta, right? Kushta or Kashta, he's coming in. And another piece of, so not only do we have this stele, this document that's in Yibu around the first cataract, where he has a stele that documents his presence there and him dedicating things to Khnum Ra, and we see his name. We also see other things that talk to us about Kashta that we can see. And another significant thing is his daughter, who we just kind of showed her cartouche, his daughter Amenirdis I. And she is someone who becomes God's wife of Amen and Waset, and what we call modern day Thebes, God's wife of men. And she is, that is significant because in obviously in ancient Kemet, the whole idea of Amen, by the time you have the New Kingdom and by the time you get to the Kushites, the whole idea of Amen and the whole idea of Amen being the source for all gods, the source for all life is significant and is paramount. And as you probably know, the pure mountain, the mountain that is at Napata, right there around the fourth cataract of the Nile, that pure mountain is seen as the home of Amen. So it's amazing when you start to read these Kushite documents and not only read them from a standpoint of them writing them and them being there in Napata at the Holy Mountain, but reading them when they're in Kemet and seeing people accept this idea. And so this idea of Amen being at the pure mountain that is in Napata, and that being basically the abode, the reside, if you will, the home of Amen, that's significant. Here is Kashta coming in, basically saying, okay, Waset, which is Thebes, right? Which we call Thebes. This is a significant temple. Ipetisut, Karnak is significant. But I'm telling you that I'm coming from Amen of Napata, where Amen lives. And you have to understand that it wasn't just him. Even when you go back into the New Kingdom, Thutmose III and various people looked at this mountain that was in Napata as being a holy mountain of God. And people like to talk about this. I want to mention this. People like to talk about it as if somehow Thutmose III during the New Kingdom and some of the Kemetic kings were not really looking at Napata and the pure mountain as being a holy mountain. They just kind of did that because, it kind of looked like a Uraeus, and maybe they were just trying to pacify the local people to get them on their side. I don't think so. I think they were committed too much to their religion and to their belief to play around with God. We look at religion in a way that it's just a political tool. And so we look at, politically politicizing religion and say, must be that people use it in a political way, not really to really worship God. They probably did this just so they could subdue the people there. I don't think so. I think when you look at the fact that the temples that were there at the pure mountain in Napata and the documents that were there and was put there by Thutmose III and people after him, Amenhotep III, people after him, you start to see that, and connecting that what was already happening in Upper Kemet and Waset at Ipetisut at Karnak, you see that there was a belief there that Amen was significant in Napata. And you can read a lot of Timothy Kendall and a lot of people have written about this and documented their thoughts and why they believe that to be true. But you can see that there was a significant belief that Napata was a significant part and a significant abode of Amen. And I'm just, making that point. It's not just this idea that there was just this hateful relationship between Kemetic people and Kushite people. We have to wash away from that. And we have to see they had much more in common and much more alike than they had that was different. They had much more of a beneficial relationship with one another than they had one that was fighting and tearing each other down and calling each other names. It was much more of a beneficial relationship. So Kashta comes in And when he's there at Waset, which is the home of where you see the Valley of the Kings and where Tutankhamun's tomb is, and this, all these major things, he sets his daughter in as the God's wife of Amen. He makes his daughter be a high priestess, which was a relatively new role in terms of the significance that it was playing in the New Kingdom, and as well as in that by the time he came around, or by the time, a relatively new significance, if you will, that was put on this role, in particular when the Kushite men were in charge. They set up their daughters as God's wife of men, and that was also taking place ahead of them as well, before them as well, but it took on a particular significance right before then and right around their time. And he puts his daughter, Amenirdis I, as a role of God's wife of men. And she's basically adopted by the previous God's wife of men, who was Shepenwepet I, who was a daughter of Asasif III. And this whole role, and just to give you a picture again of Amenirdis, her cartouche. So she took on a cartouche. Her and the women that you find who were God's wife of men. So imagine from a Kemetic and a Kushite standpoint, there was never just one aspect of God. There was always male and female. So when you see, you're going to see mother and son, you're going to see husband and wife. You're never going to see, even though we just talk about one aspect of it, we'll just talk about Amen. There was always Amen and Mut. And it was mother and son, it was mother and father, and usually sons. So you saw that the triad, and what would come forth from that reunion when mother and father got together is a child would come forth. So we look at it now as Amen, or we look at it now as Ptah, we look at it now as Tahuti, but all of them had female counterparts that were significant, that according to Kemetic and Kushite people, they took seriously, and they worship and they identified the female aspect of God. So his daughter, Amenirdis the first, was taking on a role as God's wife, God's counterpart. She was literally taking on a role as God's counterpart. Amen, the deity, Amen, would have Mut, if you will, as his wife, and Amenirdis, Kashta's daughter, was taking on that role of a living, breathing God's wife, God's counterpart and God's consort. And so when you see that, even as I kind of point out something here that I want to kind of put it, I'll kind of put this so you can see that this particular is a stamp that was done that looked at some of the excavations that were done in the Sudan, like in the 1970s and just thereabouts and there before. And you would notice that on either side of it, with Amen in the middle, that's Shu and Tefnut, which is an example of the hot air and dryness and the cool and wetness that are a part of the aspects and those fundamental principles and kind of ideas that are a part of the founding creation of the universe. I mean, it's literally what they saw Shu and Tefnut as being the founding aspects. When Amen, when Ptah brought things into existence, they brought Shu and Tefnut before they brought anything else into existence, and they gave birth to all the other deities that would be expressions of God. So they are male and female. Their hotness and coolness, their wet and dryness, they are male and female, opposites of the same thing. That was a significant part of ancient Kushite and Kemetic thought. And so this idea that his daughter would be God's wife of Amen was significant. And it took on a special role, a special significant role under the Kushite rulers. And so you have his daughter there, and she is the consort of Amen. So she becomes head of Ipet-Sut, the temple at Karnak, and she has a whole resource. She has a whole administrative staff, literally a huge staff, and resources, estates, and other temples that would feed into her and give her resources so that she could do her job in terms of being God's wife and being the person who legitimized the king's throne, as well as the person who interceded on behalf of the king and behalf of the nation, so that Amen would protect and give blessings to the land and give blessings to the king and peace to the entire land. That was her role. She was to make sure that happened. And so she had a whole staff. She had resources being tied into her. She had money, if you will, like expensive things being given to her so they could be offered as offerings in the temple, from temples around the area that they controlled, as well as from farms and various places like that. She had a large estate that she really managed as being God's wife of Amen. And this is Kashta putting his daughter in. And we see that in the documents, he puts his daughter in as God's wife of Amen. She's adopted by the previous one. And now you seem to have these records of Kashta. So we see him at the first cataract at Yebu, at that whole area where for Khnum, where he's doing that stela. You see him mentioned where he talks about being the Lord and the King of Upper and Lower Kemet, then the Sut and the Bedi, and being the son of Ra, the Kushite, if you will. We see him in the stela at Kusha, at the first cataract at Yebu, and we also see him putting his daughter in as God's wife of Amen in Waset. And he is at this time in control of all of Upper Kemet, as well as several cities above that. He is in control of it, plus all of Lower Nubia and Upper Nubia. And so we see him begin to put his daughter in charge there. And we see a couple of things. We begin to see there's an artifact that shows him being there and being suckled, if you will, being nursed by Mut, who is considered to be Amen's wife. He's being nursed by that, which was an important kind of idea, if you will, for a person who's a king to be the daughter of, or the son of a person who's a ruler, be the daughter of, or the son of a goddess, if you will, and Mut is one of them. So you find him being in certain types of artifacts being suckled, and by Mut is suckled him and nursing him. So you see several things with respect to Kashta, not only at the first cataract and at Yebu, but also at Waset, with his daughter being Amenirdis and being the God's wife of Amen, as well as other artifacts that kind of speak to him. And you start to say, wait a minute, this guy's doing something. And as I mentioned, as we start to think about who's significant in history, we can't let people define for us and define for you what's significant. And we can't let people begin to say to us that, the way in which we looked at life and the way in which they looked at the world, because I know a lot of people will look at this and they won't even respect it, or they'll say, oh, this is evil. They won't necessarily respect it. But, we will live in a world and live in a way where we don't respect men and women, where we don't respect women. It's almost okay for us to be in a world where people are abused or women are being paid, 65 cents on the dollar to what men are being paid for the exact same job and the exact same experience and qualifications. Those things are okay. That you can have live in a world where, there's a Supreme Court in the United States where you've had like a handful of women in the entire history of the Supreme Court. Like we can live in worlds where women are mistreated, or in certain places around the world, when a woman gets a divorce, the man can set her on fire. I mean, you've probably heard of those types of things. In various places, a woman is set on fire and burned, or women are not allowed to even be in public in certain places, or to have a driver's license, or to go to school. We can live in worlds like that, but not respect the people who literally respected and saw the feminine in God. They saw God as an expression of the feminine and an expression of the will. They saw these things as expressions of God, and not one that should be dominant over another. So I think we should remember that and respect that. Respect them. So as we go on, so one of the other things that jumps out at me when we speak about Kashta is not only some of the artifacts that we see, and we also have his burial that we believe is in El Kuru. So when you look at El Kuru, which is right there by Napata, around the fourth, right there around Napata, he's buried there. He's believed he's buried in grave number 8, KU8. That's how it's designated from archaeological standpoint. So not only do we see that, it's amazing as we jump here. There are a couple things that kind of speak to what they believed in. And I want to share this particular stela that was done by his son, Piankhy. And Piankhy is the man who will become and take over the northern part of Kemet as well, after his father Kashta kind of established things in the southern part of Kemet and Upper Kemet. There is a famous stela, if you will, that Piankhy has, that's at Napata, that's right, that's there at Napata, that talks about his proclamation. It gives us an idea of what they believe. And it talks about kind of his proclamation in terms of him becoming king and what their belief system was. And I want to kind of share that with you. And here's Piankhy in Napata, right here on the fourth cataract, right here at the Pure Mountain, the Temple of Amen. And he's saying, Amen of Napata has set me upon the throne and has granted me rulership over every foreign nation. Those who I say are officials or rulers, they become rulers. They are the rulers. Those who I say are not rulers are not rulers. He's saying right there, a lot of places, a lot of times how they administered their lands in the ancient world, ancient Kemet and ancient Kush, they were rulers over all these lands, and they put officials like governors. And some of those governors would take on like official titles, if you will, and they would, say, I'm the governor of this, or maybe they would give themselves a royal title. But they were under the rulership of the main king, if you will. So they had various areas that they controlled. And here's Piankhy, Kashta's son, saying, God of Napata, not of Waset right yet, God of Napata, Amen of Napata, where they are around the fourth cataract here, Amen of Napata has put me on the throne. And he says this before he talks about Waset, before he talks about Epet Sut. He's saying, Amen of Napata has put me on the throne. And whoever I say is a ruler, whoever I say is a governor will be a governor. The person who I says is not a governor will not be a governor. He's saying, I'm controlling this. And I'm the one who speaks into existence those who will be in control of these lesser areas and smaller areas in the kingdom, in the area which I rule and I control. And then he goes on to say, that, then Amen of Waset. So now he's talking about the area that's quote unquote thieves. Amen of Waset has granted me rulership over the black land. He literally says, Amen of Waset has granted me rulership over the black land, over Kemet. He's let so you know that they obviously the Kemetic people called their name Kemet with respect to the black land. Amen of Waset has granted me rulership over the black land. Those who say that they will make a formal appearance as a ruler or some type of official appearance, I will say whether or not they make an official appearance. If I tell them to make an official appearance, they will make an official appearance. If I tell them not to make an official appearance, they will not. He is saying that Amen of Waset, Amen of Napata set me on the throne. And Amen of Waset has granted me rulership over the black land, has made me ruler over the black land. And that's significant when you think about the black land and Kemet being called the black land. And that's why I say the black land. And that's why we talk about a lot, because they're calling themselves the black land. He is saying Amen of Thebes, where Soot is, where Waset is, where this major, you can go there today and you can see remnants of the temple. We call it Luxor, or the temple we call it Karnak. You can see Amenhotep III's remains. You can see the Valley of the Kings, the Valley of the Queens, Hatshepsut's temple. You can see the Ramesside. You can see the Ramesseum. You can see Mentuhotep II. You can see all these magnificent things in Waset. And all these things would have been built, by the time that he's talking about. He's saying Amen of Waset has given me rulership over the black land. So here is important for us to think about. He's talking about Amen of Napata and Amen of Waset. He is not making a differentiation between the two in terms of one is better than the other. And he's clearly saying that it is Napata that granted him first. That it is Amen of Napata that granted him his first rulership over all lands. So it is Amen of Napata that gave me rulership over all lands, and it is Amen of Waset that gave me rulership over the black land. This is what and it's an amazing thing. You think about the Kushite mindset and what they're thinking. It's remarkable as I look at that. And as he goes on to say, I'll tell those who will give their formal appearances when they will give their formal appearance, if they'll be ruler. And then he says, for anyone that I grant my favor to, for anyone upon whom I grant my favor, it will be impossible to seize their town. If I grant favor of someone who is one of these smaller rulers, if I give them favor, it's going to be impossible for you to take their town, even though I'm not there. Even though the town is not in my hand and I'm not physically there, it's going to be impossible for you to take their town. And he says, gods make kings. The lesser gods make kings. Even men can make a king, but Amen has made me. Deities can make kings. Even people can make kings. Men can make kings, but Amen has made me. This is Piankhy. And he's saying those who I put rulership as rulers will be rulers, and those who will not be rulers, if I say they will not be rulers. And it doesn't matter if you have people, men who can make a king, even your deities can make a king, but Amen has made me. Amen has made me ruler. So as I think about that, I want to kind of respect and I want to kind of remember Kashta. I want to remember him, and I want to remember his family and his descendants, and it's not just him, it's people who came before him and the people who were remarkable, like Tahaka and Shabaka and Piankhy and Tanwetamani and the people who were able to help their kingship and their land, their rulership last for well over 1,000 years. I want to remember today. So I thank you for joining me. I asked you to share this with somebody, tell somebody about this. Thank you so much, and talk to you next time.